I watched this film clip about Winston Churchill, featuring a young boy living a tough life. Charles Bronson was an American film and television actor, especially known for his tough guy roles. Bronson had an imposing presence, with a gaze that could feel like knives cutting into your very soul. Despite his reputation as a stern actor who barely interacted with his co-stars, Bronson had a soft side. One that Jill Ireland, his great love, was able to uncover. Their love story was one of the most remarkable in Hollywood, yet unlike in fiction, this one didn't end well. Curious to know why? Stay with us as we explore this journey of growth, love, and loss. Bronson was born on November 3, 1921, in Ehrenfeld, Pennsylvania, a coal mining town in the Allegheny Mountains north of Johnstown. He was the 11th of 15 children in a Roman Catholic family of Lithuanian descent. This large family lived in a small cabin with cold water, and they slept in shifts. The railroad tracks leading out of the mine were just a few feet from their house. His father, Walter Binsky, was originally from Druskininkai, a village in southern Lithuania, while Bronson's mother, Mary, had Lithuanian ancestry as well, though she was born in the coal region of Tamaqua, Pennsylvania. Bronson mentioned that his home wasn't filled with the sounds of English during his childhood. Like many children of first-generation Americans, he explained that his accent was strong enough to make others believe he was a foreigner, even when he served in the military. Besides English, he could speak Lithuanian and Russian. In a 1973 interview, Bronson reflected on his relationship with his father, admitting he never really knew him well. He wasn't even sure if he liked or disliked his father, remembering only that whenever his mother announced his father's arrival, the children would hide. After his father's death from cancer in 1933, Bronson began working in the coal mines, first in the office and later in the mines themselves. He recalled earning just $1 per ton of coal extracted, saying in a later interview that he worked double shifts just to make $1, equivalent to around $24 per week today. Bronson described the dangerous work he did with his brother, clearing tunnels between mines where cave-ins were common. The Bronsons were very poor during the Great Depression, and Bronson remembered going hungry often. His mother couldn't even afford milk for his sister, who drank hot tea instead. Bronson even confessed that he wore his older sister's dress to school because they couldn't afford clothes for him. He was the first in his family to graduate from high school. Bronson continued working in the mines until he joined the United States Army Air Forces in 1943, during the dark days of World War II. He served in the 60th Flexible Gunnery Training Squadron, and by 1945, he was a gunner on a Boeing B-29 Superfortress in the 61st Bombardment Squadron stationed in Guam, flying combat missions over Japan. He survived 25 missions and was awarded the Purple Heart for injuries sustained in battle. When the war ended, Bronson felt lost. Eventually, he found new purpose as a traveling actor and through education. After World War II, Bronson took on various odd jobs. He joined a theater group in Philadelphia to paint sets and soon began landing small acting roles. Later, he shared an apartment in New York with Jack Klugman, who would also become an actor. Finally, he moved to Hollywood to study at the Pasadena Playhouse. Though he didn't initially earn credits, Bronson made his film debut in You're in the Navy Now, 1951, directed by Henry Hathaway. He reportedly got the role because he was the only actor who could burp on command. 2 more screen appearances followed in 1951 in The Mob and The People Against O'Hara, both directed by John Sturges. In 1952, he appeared in Bloodhounds of Broadway, Battlezone, Pat and Mike, Diplomatic Courier, My Six Convicts, The Marrying Kind, and Red Skies of Montana. That year, he also boxed Roy Rogers on television in Knockout and appeared as a boxer in a comedy sketch on The Red Skelton Show. On CBS's Biff Baker USA, he shared the screen with guest star Lee Marvin. In 1953, he played Igor, Vincent Price's assistant in the horror film House of Wax, directed by Andre de Toth. To prepare for his mute character, he took a sign language course. Ben S. Parker of the Commercial Appeal described Bronson as adding a silent threat to the role as the deaf-mute assistant to a madman. The film ranked 4th at the U.S. box office that year, grossing $23 million. In 2014, House of Wax was added to the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress. In 1954, he adopted the name Bronson. Due to the House Un-American Activities Committee hearings, Many names of Eastern European origin sounded suspicious in the anti-Soviet climate. He took inspiration for his new name from the Bronson Gate at Paramount Studios, located at the corner of Melrose Avenue and Bronson Street. In 1959, Bronson was cast as a supporting actor in the war film Never So Few, produced by John Sturges. That same year, he made television appearances in episodes of Yancey Derringer, Hell and High Water, and U.S. Marshal. After these early roles, Charles began his career in the entertainment world with a few other roles in 1960. In The Magnificent Seven by John Sturges, he played one of the 7 gunmen defending the defenseless. According to co-star Eli Wallach, Bronson was a loner who kept his distance during filming. He earned $50,000 for the role, which would be worth significantly more today. The film was a box office failure in the U.S., but its success in Europe ultimately made it profitable. Harrison's reports called it an excellent Western, well-acted, and filled with action, human interest, suspense, romance, and humor. The U.S. Library of Congress added it to the National Film Registry in 2013, deeming it culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. In 1960, he appeared in Zigzag, an episode of Riverboat, The Generous Politician, an episode of The Islanders, and Street of Hate, an episode of Laramie. He had a recurring role on Hennessy, with appearances in the 3rd episode, Hennessy a Lag Gun, and in episode 26, The No Good Nick, which aired in 1961. That year, Bronson also took supporting roles in Master of the World, directed by William Whitney, and A Thunder of Drums, by Joseph Newman, as well as in X-15, directed by Richard Donner. In 1961, Bronson appeared on television in an episode of One Step Beyond titled The Last Round on January 10th, and he co-starred with Elizabeth Montgomery in an episode of The Twilight Zone titled 2. He received an Emmy Award nomination for his appearance in an episode called Memory in White on CBS's General Electric Theater. The following year, he appeared in the Elvis Presley film Kid Galahad. In 1963, Bronson starred in The Great Escape by John Sturges, a World War II drama about prisoners of war. The film was well received by critics. The Rotten Tomatoes critics' consensus stated that with its meticulously crafted story and memorable cast, The Great Escape is a timeless action classic. It grossed $1.7 million at the box office on a $4 million budget, becoming one of the most profitable films of the year. It was nominated for Best Motion Picture at the Golden Globe Awards and ranked 19th on the AFI 100 Years 100 Thrills list. Bronson continued to achieve numerous classics and successes, and in 1968, he actively worked on European films. While shooting Villa Rides, French film producers for Jean Herman's Adieu El Ami sought an American co-star to act alongside Alain Delon, a fan of Bronson's work. Bronson's agent, Paul Kohner, recalled that the producer told the actor that in American cinema, all the money and publicity went to charismatic heroes, while in Europe, audiences were drawn more to character than to appearance. Bronson was hired in December 1967. The film was shot in Marseille and Paris and was a massive success in France, grossing around $6 million. Bronson continued to appear in a series of international productions, and the films produced in Europe gained immense popularity. TV Guide praised the chemistry between Delon and Bronson. Another European hit was Sergio Leone's spaghetti western, Once Upon a Time in the West, where he played a leading role. Bronson had previously turned down Leone for the lead in A Fistful of Dollars in 1964. Once Upon a Time in the West sold 8 million tickets in the U.S., grossing over $5 million from 3.7 million ticket sales. It sold another 14 million admissions in France and 13 million in Germany. It was added to the National Film Registry by the U.S. Library of Congress as culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant and is considered one of the greatest westerns and one of the greatest films of all time. Leone described Bronson as the greatest actor he had ever worked with. In 1972, Bronson embarked on a series of action film successes for United Artists with Michael Winner's Chato's Land. It was his production company with Winner that led them to make additional films together in the following years, including The Mechanic and The Stone Killer. By 1973, Bronson had become the world's biggest box office draw, earning $1 million per film. But in 1974, Bronson's most famous role came at the age of 52 in Death Wish, his most popular film directed by Michael Winner. He played Paul Kersey, a a successful New York architect who becomes a vigilante after the murder of his wife and the assault of his daughter. Over the following 2 decades, for sequels to this film, all featuring Bronson, were produced. Many found the film offensive, calling it an immoral threat to society and a promoter of antisocial behavior. Yet that year, it became the 20th highest-grossing film in the United States, earning $22 million. Charles Bronson had made a name for himself in action films and continued in this genre for years. In 1975, he appeared in 2 films for Tom Grease, Breakout and Breakheart Pass, a western based on an Alistair MacLean novel that was a box office failure. That same year, he also appeared in Walter Hill's debut film Hard Times, playing a Depression-era street fighter making a living in illegal bare-knuckle boxing matches in Louisiana. The film received strong reviews and was the 29th highest-grossing film in the U.S. that year, earning $5 million at the box office. Roger Ebert called it a powerful and brutal film featuring a definitive performance by Charles Bronson. Bronson reached the peak of his box office appeal in 1975, ranking 4th behind Robert Redford, Barbra Streisand, and Al Pacino. The following year, Bronson directed a Western comedy for UA, From Noon Till 3. That same year, he filmed St. Ives, his first movie under the direction of J. Lee Thompson. In 1977, he starred in Irvin Kershner's Raid on Entebbe, where he played Dan Shamran, in a film based on the true story of the Entebbe raid. The TV movie, broadcast on NBC, generally received good reviews, aiming to highlight its impressive cast. A theatrical version was also released directly to cinemas in the United Kingdom and elsewhere in Europe. In early 1977, it won the Golden Globe Award for Best Television Movie and was also nominated for an Emmy Award in the category of Best Dramatic or Comedy Special. It also won additional awards and nominations. That same year, he co-starred with Thompson in UA's production of The White Buffalo, directed by Don Siegel and also released by UA that year. Finally, in 1977, Bronson's name surfaced as a star in Raise the Titanic, although he did not ultimately appear in the film. Ingmar Bergman wanted to make a movie with Bronson in the 1970s, but Bronson declined, saying Bergman's works were boring. With Bergman, everything was about weakness and illness, he said. Bronson auditioned for the role of Superman in the 1978 film version, but producer Ilya Saukind rejected him, feeling his look was too rugged and instead cast Christopher Reeve. Another role he was reportedly considered for in 1978 was in Capricorn 1. He was wanted to play Snake Plissken in the 1981 film Escape from New York, but director John Carpenter felt he was too tough and too old for the role, opting for Kurt Russell instead. Bronson appeared in 2 films for ITC, Love and Bullets and Borderline. He reunited with Thompson in Cabo Blanco. In 1981, Bronson starred alongside Lee Marvin in Peter Hunt's adventure film Death Hunt. It's a fictionalized account of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police's pursuit of a man named Albert Johnson, played by Bronson. In Vincent Canby's review for the New York Times, he noted that Mr. Bronson and Mr. Marvin are such pros at this kind of movie that they can each create a character out of nothing. The film grossed $5 million at the U.S. box office. Between 1976 and 1994, Bronson commanded high salaries to act in many films produced by smaller companies, including Cannon Films, which produced several of his later films. Bronson agreed to a $1.5 million contract with Cannon to star in Death Wish 2, again directed by Michael Winner. In the storyline, architect Paul Kersey, again played by Bronson, moves to Los Angeles with his daughter, who is then killed by gang members, prompting Kersey to become a vigilante once more. Cannon Films quickly signed Bronson for 10 to Midnight, where he played a police officer pursuing a serial killer. The film marked Bronson's 4th collaboration with director J. Lee Thompson. ITC Entertainment hired Thompson and Bronson for The Evil That Men Do. Cannon Films reunited Bronson with Winner for Death Wish 3 and Murphy's Law, directed by Thompson. In the latter, Bronson portrayed Jack Murphy, LAPD detective who becomes antisocial, turning to alcohol to numb the pain of harsh reality. In 1986, he starred in John McKenzie's Act of Vengeance. This film is based on a true story, in which he played Union leader Joseph Yablonsky, fighting against corruption in the Mine Workers Union for HBO's television film. Bronson took on a completely different role, saying it was a genuine change for him. "I'm not wearing a mustache, and I'm not holding a gun. I'm not doing any violence in this film. He explained that, since he hadn't acted for television in a long time, he had to think about it carefully before accepting, partly due to his background in mining. Taking on this film required Bronson to turn down the lead role in Delta Force. Critics Greg Berliuk for the Kingston Whig Standard and Robert Deo for the Advocate Messenger praised Bronson for playing against type. Despite his fame and fortune, Bronson was still haunted by what he had lost in his youth and his struggles as an actor. A 1973 newspaper profile stated that he was so shy and introverted that he couldn't even sit and watch his own films. Bronson was described by Forbes as always wary, harboring grudges, disliking interviews, hating to give anything of himself, and still unable to believe it had all actually happened to him. He remained bitter about his delayed recognition in the United States, and after achieving fame, he refused to work with a notorious director who had snubbed him years earlier. In 1974, Roger Ebert wrote that Bronson never shared spontaneous thoughts, didn't elaborate, and had no theories about his films. He wrote that Bronson had threatened to go after Time magazine critic Jay Cox, who had written a negative review that Bronson perceived as a personal attack. Unlike other actors who projected violence on screen, Bronson seemed violent in real life. There was only one person capable of seeing beyond all his defenses. How did Charles Bronson and Jill Ireland meet? It was in the early 60s, near the end of Hollywood's golden age, and Charles Bronson was still married to Harriet Tendler. They had met in a drama school in Philadelphia and came from two completely different worlds. In the book Charlie and Me, she was 18, and he was 26. Tendler's father was a very successful dairy farmer, while Bronson came from a very poor family that barely made ends meet. It was one of those fairy tale encounters that led to a close friendship and then a much more romantic relationship. Harriet supported them both while they were still struggling actors hoping for their big break. Slowly but surely, opportunities began to open up for Bronson, and when the producers of John Sturges' The Great Escape reached out to him, he was more than ready to take the next step in his career. Unfortunately, for Tendler, it was the beginning of the end of their relationship. Bronson had the chance to work alongside co-stars like Steve McQueen, James Garner, James Coburn, and Richard Attenborough on one of his shoots. The sweetest moment was still to come from David McCallum, who brought his wife Jill for a visit to the production. Bronson reportedly told McCallum that he was going to steal his wife, and rightfully so. The Scottish actor was provoked. True to his word, the inevitable happened. Bronson and Tendler separated in 1965, and McCallum and Ireland split in 1967. In 1968, Charles Bronson married Jill Ireland. Though unpleasant, at this point, Bronson and McCallum had mended their relationship, and everything was settled amicably. And the rest, as they say, is history. Their romance marked the beginning of a relationship that was both romantic and productive. They lived in a large mansion in Bel Air, Los Angeles, with 7 children, 2 from Bronson's previous marriage to Harriet Tendler, 3 of Jill's, including an adopted child, and 2 of their own, Zulika and Katrina, the latter also adopted. This relationship not only spread love around them, but also paved the way for a business partnership that resulted in more than 16 films. Bronson had made a name for himself in the industry and ensured Ireland almost always had a lead or supporting role in his works. Miles apart from the stature her now famous husband possessed, Bronson made sure to offer her many opportunities, from small roles in films, like Robert Mitchum's companion in Buzz Kulik's Villa Rides, to Maria Reina Vacchi in Terence Young's The Vacchi Papers, up to her last film, Peter Hunt's Assassination. Ireland made sure not to waste her chances. Of all the films they made together, perhaps the most telling expression of their love is Frank D. Gilroy's From Noon Till 3. Typically, Bronson takes up all the screen time, while Ireland plays a damsel in distress, a side character, or a femme fatale who slightly alters the protagonist's path in this romantic Western comedy. The Irish Amanda that Jill portrays is the soul of the narrative, bringing life to an objectively mediocre film. One might presume that the role was a sort of gift from Bronson to his wife, allowing her to showcase her acting talents from a different angle. Also representative of her place in their relationship, Ireland's portrayal reveals that she was the soul who illuminated an idyllic layer of the often misunderstood Bronson and was the bright light in his life, which had many tribulations to overcome. The film certainly benefited from her stunning beauty and endearing spirit. Bronson and Ireland were on top of the world. To put it simply, they were one of Hollywood's most powerful couples, and his star power continued to grow with each film until tragic news suddenly struck them. Jill Ireland passed away in 1984. Jill Ireland had been diagnosed with breast cancer for 6 years. The author bravely battled the disease and wrote 2 books recounting her life struggles, My Fight for Survival and Lifeline. Due to her courageous efforts in fighting cancer, Ireland also received the Courage Award from the American Cancer Society, presented by President Ronald Reagan. Sadly, she passed away from this fatal disease in 1990 at their Malibu home. A heartbroken Bronson sat by her side at the time of her death. Charles was never the same after her passing. He married singer Kim Weeks in 1998, but Ireland would always be in his heart. He had a hollow cane built to commemorate his wife after her death, as it had been custom-made for him, and he placed his late wife's ashes in it. For her contributions to the film industry, Jill Ireland has a star on Hollywood Boulevard's Walk of Fame. In 1991, Jill Clayburgh played the lead character in the TV movie Reason for Living, the Jill Ireland story, based on Ireland's memoir Lifelines. She was posthumously credited as the executive producer. The film received mixed reviews upon release. As part of her research for the role, even though actress Clayburgh had never met her subject, she read Ireland's memoir and listened to recorded interviews Ireland had participated in. Charles Bronson might be considered a Hollywood star, but his life wasn't easy. He had to endure difficult jobs, like coal miner and gunner on AB-29 during World War II, even though he got his big break in the film world. It was through finding Jill Ireland that he truly transformed his life. It's simply incredible how much Charles Bronson fell in love with another person. In short, it was rather out of character for the actor to show the slightest emotion, but even the toughest succumbed to romance. Jill Ireland's beauty and spirit were too much for him. He let his guard down and found a loving partner in return. The hundreds of films they made together will undoubtedly remain a testament to one of the most cinematic relationships Hollywood has ever known. With the passing of his other half, it was really only a matter of time before he followed Charles Bronson's path. Bronson died on August 30, 2003, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, at the age of 81. While pneumonia and Alzheimer's disease were cited as causes of his death, neither is mentioned on his death certificate. The listed causes of death are primarily respiratory failure, metastatic lung cancer, with secondary chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and congestive cardiomyopathy. He was laid to rest at Brownsville Cemetery in West Windsor, Vermont, with the cane containing Jill Ireland's ashes, signifying that the two are together even in death. At the time of his death, film critic Stephen Hunter described Bronson as overflowing with masculine vitality, stoic toughness, strength, and always projecting an ambiguous charisma. Was he an ugly but attractive man, or an attractive but ugly man? One was never sure, hence the need for closer study. Hunter said he never became a great actor, but he knew exactly how to dominate a scene subtly. Bronson was the man whose name ended in a vowel, who never left his position, never complained, and never backed down. He was intense, he was stern, he brimmed with class resentment. Yet he held his ground, did the work, and expected no recognition. His nobility was all the more palpable for never needing to be expressed in words. In 1974, Bronson told critic Roger Ebert that he was just a product, like a bar of soap to be sold as best as possible. He said that in the action films he produced at the time, there wasn't much room for acting. He stated, "I provide a presence. There are never long dialogue scenes to establish a character. It must be fully developed at the start of the film and ready to work." Director Michael Winner noted that Bronson didn't need to go into detail about what he was doing or how he did it because he had a quality the camera reacted to. He had a strong screen presence, even when he stood still or played a completely passive role. There was depth, a mystery, and always a sense that something was about to happen. Charles Bronson may have passed away, but his importance and legacy were far from over. Indeed, Bronson had a tremendous influence on the action genre and cinema. His style and the way he interpreted context became a reference for future action heroes. Bronson's films addressed themes of justice, vengeance, and morality. These themes easily captured the public's attention and inspired the work of other filmmakers. Furthermore, his portrayals of complex characters set up intricate developments in traditional genre roles in cinema, offering a much deeper depiction of masculinity. This effect endures even today, as many modern action stars owe their careers to Bronson's example. Bronson was recognized many times during his career for his work in film, although he received very few major awards during his lifetime. The popularity and respect others had for him speak volumes about his talent and the overall impact he had in his industry. Bronson may be gone, but his legacy endures. Of course, the raw intensity of some of his films and the captivating stories largely explain why he continues to stand out as a timeless force in cinema. His fans and critics revisit his work to ensure that his contributions to cinema are not forgotten. Many aspiring actors and filmmakers find inspiration in Bronson's life, or at least that's what his story tells. For these people, his journey from rags to riches will be a source of inspiration for those with ideas but lacking confidence or courage in their voice. If you enjoyed this thrilling story of success, love, and loss, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below to let us know what you think.